Hi, I'm Hannah Pavor and my partner is Colleen Moulton, and our project is about the link between home healthcare and COVID-19 statistics in the United States. Our main point of interest is COVID-19 data and how it is distributed across each state. We are interested in the patterns and trends, but also in the anomalies that the data can tell us. We also looked at healthcare data pertaining to each state, specifically the healthcare agencies and their rankings. The purpose of this project is to characterize the correlation between the current state of healthcare in the US and how that might relate to COVID. Analysis of these trends may be useful in fields like epidemiology, which is the study of diseases and how they affect our society. We can also use this data to further strengthen our healthcare system. Since COVID is unprecedented, no one was prepared to deal with the events that have happened. However, by studying and making note of the current data, we can be better prepared in the future if a similar event occurs. For the downloaded dataset requirement, we used a CSV file from a .gov website which contained information about each state's healthcare agencies. For the first web collection requirement, we used an API that had information about COVID statistics characterized by state. For the second web collection requirement, we scraped an article from the New York Times that showcased different trends relating to COVID in the US. For the downloaded dataset requirement, we decided to use a CSV file containing information about healthcare providers. We characterized the average of each state's rating by using the group by and mean functions in the Pandas module. For our first web collection requirement, we used an API containing stats about COVID. We converted the information to a dictionary and then exported that into a CSV file. A lot of the times, the numbers were not reported, so we had to take these inconsistencies into account when completing calculations such as rounding and casting. For web collection requirement number 2, we parsed the website from the New York Times using Beautiful Soup. We extracted specific tables detailing unique information about the impact of COVID in each state. Some of the values that we pulled from the charts had inconsistencies such as newline characters, tab characters, and duplicate values, so we used functions such as .replace and even slicing to handle these errors. So on to our insights. So we were interested to see the average ratings of home healthcare when the states were divided up into the 9 sub-regions defined by the U.S. Census Bureau. The United States is a country whose people vary vastly by location, so analyzing these ratings by sub-region may lead to a greater understanding of how your home can influence your outlook on the importance of quality home healthcare. The steps we took to manipulate this data included making lists representative of each sub-region of the U.S. with strings of each state's abbreviation inside. Then we read the relevant data from a sheet of our Excel file containing the states ranked by average home health care rating into a Pandas data frame. After slicing this data frame into smaller data frames corresponding to each region, we found the mean home health care rating for each of these regions by using aggregate functions. Finally, we returned a string that lists out each region with its corresponding value home health care rating. We were also interested to see the average COVID-19 death rates when the states were divided up into the 9 subregions. Since, once again, the U.S. is a country whose people vary vastly by location, analyzing these death rates by subregion may lead to greater understanding of how your location and home can influence your reaction and outlook on the importance of this coronavirus pandemic. The steps we took to manipulate this data included making lists representative of each subregion of the U.S. with strings of each state's abbreviation inside. Next, we created empty lists once again, corresponding to each subregion that we will later add the state's death rate into. Using a CSV reader, we created a list of lists and then found the death rates for each state in a loop. If no death rate was reported, we omitted that state. Then we found the average using the sum, len, and round functions and returned a string that displayed this data.
For this insight, we decided to combine the information from our downloaded dataset and our API. We wanted to see if there would be a positive correlation between the number of COVID tests that came out negative and the quality of patient care rating per state. We took a ratio of the total negative tests divided by the total number of tests. Surprisingly, when we compared it to the patient average of the patient care star rating, there seemed to be no correlation between the two. This could show that other factors have more of an effect on how COVID is spreading and being handled than the quality of healthcare in each state. For this insight, we wanted to see how different regions of the U.S. were dealing with COVID. Using the data we scraped from the New York Times, we categorized the data into 4 columns: states where new cases are higher and staying high, states where new cases are lower but going up, states where new cases are lower and staying low, and states where new deaths are increasing. We then correlated each state to a region of the U.S. and grouped together each category with each region. Looking at the chart, we noticed that in the mountain region, many states where new cases are higher and had a daily average of at least 15 new cases per 100,000 people over the last week, according to the New York Times. We can also see that a majority of New England states had a fewer amount of cases, but currently seem to be increasing in number. In contrast, the South Atlantic region and Pacific region have few cases. And finally, the West North Central region has the highest percentage of new deaths. For this function, we decided to calculate how many 5-star reviews patients gave their healthcare agency per state. We thought that this analysis might give some indication as to the quality of healthcare in the state and how patients feel about it. Florida has the highest number of 5-star reviews, while the lowest are Iowa, Oregon, New Jersey, and Maine, as they only have one agency with a 5-star review. Ultimately, highlighting the ratings of these agencies show how residents feel about the service that they are provided, and the high variation between the states shows that the quality of healthcare may differ significantly per state. Considering that the U.S.'s healthcare system is a topic of relevance at the moment, data like this is useful for making decisions. Next, we have our visuals. For this one, we set out wanting to see if there was any correlation between a state's average home healthcare rating and its current COVID-19 death rate. To generate this visualization, we made 2 PANDAS data frames out of our previously aggregated state average home healthcare data that was stored in an Excel sheet and out of the COVID statistics for each state stored in a CSV file. After narrowing the data frames to the relevant information, we concatenated them and dropped any rows with NaN values. Finally, we used Plotly to configure this scatter plot. As we expected, a negative correlation begins to form on the rightmost part of the scatter plot. This graph shows the number of people currently hospitalized from COVID by state. Looking at the graph, the general trend shows a positive correlation with the population of the state. The top 4 most populated states in the U.S. are California, Texas, Florida, and New York, and these states are all pretty close to the front of the graph. A notable exception would be Missouri, which is in the top 10 states of patients currently hospitalized, but is ranked 18th in population. Another interesting outlier is Massachusetts. It ranks 15th in population, but is near the middle of this graph. The data shown can be used to conclude that the number of COVID cases does not purely depend on the size of the state. Other factors, such as policy, could have a greater impact. We were interested to see which states accounted for the most amount of positive COVID-19 tests in the U.S. To begin, we created a PANDAS data frame out of the COVID statistic for each state, and then sliced it to keep only the state and positive test columns. Then we found the total amount of positive tests using group by and aggregate functions. Using Plotly, we created a pie chart from these values. It was very interesting to see what states held some of the top spots, as some of the top 10 were not necessarily widely discussed in the media. We also noticed that only 8 states account for almost 50% of the total positive tests in the United States. There were 5 main results that we gathered after our analysis that we viewed as some of the most important conclusions. First, we can conclude that there is a negative correlation between average home healthcare rating and COVID death rate in most states. This may hint towards the fact that the states that put more emphasis on healthcare and other facets are better at handling the virus. Also, the highest COVID death rates occur in the regions of New England and the Middle Atlantic. These areas need to be putting more emphasis on battling the virus. 2 more regions that should be on the forefront of our minds are the Mountain region and the West North Central region, since they have the highest level of new increasing cases and the highest percentage of new deaths, respectively. Current hospitalizations are at an all-time high in Texas right now, which means we need to be aware of lowering availability in Texas hospitals. Finally, we did not discover a correlation between the ratio of negative tests to total tests in a state and their average home healthcare rating, meaning that quality healthcare does not necessarily ensure a lower number of negative tests. We hope that our analysis will prove helpful to healthcare officials in many different ways. Because we analyze the data both from home healthcare perspective and a region perspective, leaders can discover how best to move forward. Also, we think that our data is a great indicator of what we should be doing in the present day to move forward from COVID-19 and what we should be doing in the future to ensure that we are better prepared for a pandemic. Thank you.